Welcome. This is a space to slow your thoughts, to let ideas unfold, to imagine what comes next without needing to decide anything. For a long time, the future was imagined as faster, brighter, more advanced. It was described in movement, in acceleration, in constant expansion. Always forward, always more. But quietly, another possibility existed. One that didn't arrive with noise, one that didn't announce itself as progress. A future that didn't rush forward, but gently changed its pace. This is not a prediction. It is a reflection on a future that remembered how to slow down. In this future, rest was no longer something that had to be earned. It wasn't a reward at the end of effort. It wasn't an interruption of productivity. Rest became the ground state. From it, movement emerged naturally. Work began and ended without exhaustion. People no longer waited until depletion forced them to stop. They slowed down before exhaustion became normal. At first, this felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. There was no constant urgency pushing each moment forward, no invisible pressure to fill every space. And in that absence, something unexpected happened. Clarity returned. Thoughts arrived more slowly. Decisions felt quieter. Not because less was happening, but because less was demanding attention. In this future, activity didn't disappear. It simply stopped competing with rest. Movement had direction, not driven by acceleration, but guided by presence. People began to notice that when rest was protected, everything changed its quality. Work became precise. Learning became patient. Even ambition softened without losing meaning. Rest was no longer seen as the opposite of progress. It was understood as its foundation. There was a time, long before this future, when exhaustion was considered normal. Tiredness was expected. Burnout was explained. And constant fatigue was quietly accepted as the cost of participation. People spoke often about pushing through, about endurance, about proving dedication by how much could be carried without stopping. In that time, rest was postponed, always scheduled for later, after the deadline, after the achievement, after everything else was finished. But in this future, that rhythm no longer made sense. Not because people worked less, but because they began to notice something they had overlooked before. It was a signal, a quiet indication that something in the structure was misaligned. When this was understood, nothing collapsed. No system had to be destroyed. No dramatic turning point announced itself. Things simply began to soften. Schedules left space where none had existed before. Days were no longer designed to be survived. They were designed to be inhabited. In this future, people stopped measuring commitment by depletion. Effort was no longer proven by exhaustion. Instead, attention shifted to sustainability, to the ability to return the next day with clarity intact. Slowly, exhaustion lost its authority. It was no longer admired, no longer romanticized, no longer treated as evidence of purpose. And as it faded, something else took its place. A steadier energy. An energy that did not spike and did not collapse. People learned that being well rested was not indulgent. It allowed work to remain meaningful and life to remain present. Work no longer asked people to outrun themselves. It no longer demanded constant urgency, constant availability, or constant proof. Work still existed, but it had changed its relationship to time. Days were shaped around natural rhythms, around focus, around recovery. People were no longer measured by how long they stayed, but by the clarity they brought while they were present. Tasks were designed to be finished, not stretched endlessly across attention. When energy faded, work paused, not as failure, but as respect. In this future, effort was allowed to have edges. People stopped confusing importance with pressure. They learned that meaningful work does not require permanent intensity. Work became quieter, more deliberate, more human. Technology did not disappear. It simply stepped back when it was no longer needed. Tools assisted, but did not demand. And because of that, people could leave their work without carrying it inside themselves. The day could end without residue. In this future, rest and work were no longer opposites. They supported each other. The most noticeable change did not appear in systems or structures. It appeared inside people. At first, it was subtle. Thoughts no longer arrived all at once. There was space between impulses, between reactions. People noticed that their attention was no longer constantly pulled in opposing directions. Moments did not compete for dominance. They unfolded one after another. The mind learned how to stay. Not fixed. Not empty. Simply present. People became aware of how much effort they had once spent managing pressure. How much energy was used just to keep moving. As that pressure faded, something unexpected emerged. A quieter confidence. Decisions were no longer rushed. Not delayed either. They arrived when they were ready. The body too changed its role. It was no longer treated as something to override. Signals were listened to, not negotiated away. Rest did not require justification. Focus did not require urgency. In this future, people stopped apologizing for their limits. Limits were no longer seen as obstacles. They were understood as orientation, as a way to move without losing direction. Memory softened. The past was no longer replayed for correction, nor erased for comfort. It became quieter, not because it disappeared, but because it no longer demanded resolution. The future, too, lost its sharp edges. It was no longer something to outrun. It became something to approach. Gently, people noticed they were no longer preparing for life while missing it. They arrived more often. In conversations, in work, in silence. Time no longer felt scarce. Not because there was more of it, but because less of it was wasted resisting the present. In this future, being awake did not mean being alert at all times. It meant being available to what was already here. And in that availability, life regained depth. Not louder, not faster, deeper. And then came a time when nothing needed to be done. When nothing needs to happen, time begins to feel different. Not slower, not faster, just less demanding. There is no next step waiting, no decision asking to be made, no direction pulling your thoughts forward. You are simply here. In this moment, progress is not measured. Productivity is irrelevant. And purpose does not need to explain itself. Existence is enough. The future does not disappear when nothing happens. It remains present, quietly, patiently, waiting without urgency. Perhaps this is where balance begins. Not in movement, but in stillness that feels safe. Not in action, but in permission. There is nothing to prepare for, nothing to optimize, nothing to improve, for it passes. This moment does not need permission to be enough. When nothing needs to happen, the world feels less fragmented. Not divided into goals and obstacles, successes and failures, before and after. Just presence. This is not a pause from life. This is part of it. A quiet layer beneath movement. A foundation that does not rush. You do not need to improve this moment. You do not need to use it wisely. You do not need to remember it later. It exists whether you hold it or not. When nothing needs to happen, the body remembers how to rest without being told. Breath settles. Muscles release without instruction. Thoughts may still appear. They always do. But now they arrive quietly. They do not demand attention. They do not ask to be followed. They pass, like weather far in the distance. There is no need to decide which thoughts matter. There is no need to finish them. Some remain unfinished. Some dissolve halfway through, and that is perfectly fine. When nothing needs to happen, identity becomes lighter. You are not what you are doing. You are not what you are becoming. You are simply present, without definition. This is not absence. This is not emptiness. This is a fullness that does not announce itself. A quiet completeness that does not need recognition. The future does not disappear here. It rests. Not paused. Not delayed. Just resting until movement feels natural again. Perhaps this is where clarity begins. Not through answers, but through silence that feels safe. Not through direction, but through stillness that holds. When nothing needs to happen, progress takes a different form. It no longer pushes forward. It deepens. There is no finish line waiting. No moment you are supposed to reach. The space has no edge. If attention fades, let it. If awareness softens, allow it. Nothing here needs to be held. The mind does not need to be quiet. It only needs permission to stop performing. To stop proving. To stop explaining itself. When nothing needs to happen, even the idea of time slows down. Minutes lose their shape. Seconds dissolve into feeling. There is only a gentle sense of being here. This is not an escape from the future. It is a way of meeting it without resistance. Without fear, without hurry. You do not need to remember this moment. You do not need to return to it later. It remains available, whether you notice it or not. When nothing needs to happen, rest becomes effortless. Awareness widens. Then narrows. Then drifts again. Like waves that do not need direction. If sleep comes, let it come. If thought continues, let it wander. There is no correct way to be here. The future will still be there when movement returns. It does not vanish because you rested. It waits. With patience. This is enough. Not forever. Not as a goal. Just for now.